At the party, I thought I was invisible, until two women cornered me, smiled, and whispered, "We've picked you." That was the moment everything changed. The evening carried the kind of warmth that wasn't only from the low golden lights strung along the walls but from the people themselves. Laughter rippled through the air, soft music drifted somewhere in the background, and the sound of glasses clinking mixed with voices weaving over one another. It wasn't a wild party, no blaring speakers, no shouting, but rather one of those gatherings where everyone seemed to know each other, or at least knew someone who knew someone. I didn't know many. I had been invited along almost as an afterthought, and though I smiled politely and joined conversations when I could, I found myself drifting toward the edges of the room, where things felt quieter. I'd always been that way, the type to observe before jumping in. The corners of the room held me more comfortably than the center did. From my vantage point, I noticed everything. The way people leaned in closer when they were interested. The way small groups shifted and broke apart like tides. The flicker of a candle in a half-empty glass, catching the edge of someone's laugh. There was comfort in being the unnoticed one, but also a familiar ache, a quiet reminder that sometimes being overlooked feels safer, even if it leaves you wishing for more. It was then that I saw them. Two women, standing together near the far side of the room. Not loud, not demanding attention, but commanding it all the same. They were older than most of the guests, not by much, but enough that their presence felt grounded in a way others didn't. There was a grace to them, the kind that wasn't about youth or sparkle, but something deeper. The way they held themselves, the way their eyes lingered on people as though they weren't just hearing but listening, as though they weren't just looking but noticing. I tried not to stare, but it was difficult. Every time I glanced across the room, they seemed to be there, laughing softly at a private joke, leaning toward one another in quiet conversation, and more than once, letting their gazes drift back toward me. It was subtle, so subtle that I almost convinced myself I was imagining it. A brief lock of eyes, the faintest smile exchanged before their attention returned to one another. Yet it left me unsettled, not in a way that felt threatening, but in the way that makes your chest tighten, your thoughts race just a little too fast. The party continued to swirl around me, voices rising and falling like a tide, but I couldn't quite anchor myself in it anymore. My awareness kept sliding back to the corner where they stood, their presence like a steady pull I didn't understand. There was a spark in the air, though I couldn't name it yet, and beneath the hum of music and laughter, something inside me whispered that tonight wasn't going to end the way I expected. I had just reached for a fresh drink, something cold, mostly ice and barely any flavor, when I felt movement beside me. A figure brushed past close enough that the faintest trail of perfume lingered in the air. It wasn't the sharp, overbearing kind, but something softer, warmer, like vanilla touched with spice. Without looking, I already knew it belonged to one of them. I turned slightly, trying not to make the motion too obvious, and caught sight of her as she moved through the small space between people. The dress she wore wasn't loud or attention-seeking, but it fit her in a way that seemed to quiet the room around her. Her confidence wasn't in the fabric or color, it was in the way she carried herself. There's a difference, I realized, between someone trying to be noticed and someone who simply is. Before I could gather myself, the other appeared at my side. She didn't crowd me, didn't force her way into my space, but the nearness of her presence was undeniable. A bracelet on her wrist shifted as she reached out casually, her fingertips brushing my forearm in a touch so light I might have thought it accidental if not for the way her eyes locked onto mine the very moment it happened. "Long night?" she asked, her voice lower than the buzz of conversation around us, yet somehow clearer. I nodded, swallowing against the sudden tightness in my throat. "A little. I don't know many people here." Her lips curved in a small, knowing smile. She didn't let go of my arm right away, though the pressure of her hand was featherlight. Instead, her thumb made the faintest shift against the fabric of my sleeve, a gesture that felt less like holding and more like reassurance. The first woman, the one who had passed just moments before, returned now, stepping in close enough that I could feel the warmth of her shoulder near mine. They exchanged a quick glance, a flicker of shared amusement that made me feel like I'd stumbled into the middle of something I didn't yet understand. "You're quieter than most," she said, tilting her head as she studied me. "That's rare in places like this." I tried to laugh it off, but it came out softer than I intended. "I guess I'm better at watching than talking." That earned a look, not judgmental, but intrigued, as though my answer had given them exactly what they hoped to hear. The one at my arm finally eased her touch, only to let her hand fall casually against mine, the edges of our fingers brushing. It wasn't bold, not something anyone else in the room would notice, but the effect it had on me was instant. My chest tightened, my pulse tripped, and I realized I was suddenly hyper-aware of every inch of space around us. The crowd still buzzed behind us, laughter and voices rising, but it felt far away now. My world had narrowed to the two women standing before me, one with her hand brushing mine, the other with her eyes fixed so intently on me that I wondered how long she'd been watching. And though I hadn't spoken more than a few words, I could already feel something shifting in the air, like the current of the evening had just changed direction and pulled me straight into it. It happened slowly, so naturally that I didn't realize I was moving until I was already halfway there. One of them touched my wrist lightly, her fingers grazing just enough to guide, not to pull. The other glanced back over her shoulder with a smile that wasn't a question but an invitation. Together, they drew me away from the main circle of voices and laughter, threading through a hallway lined with framed photos and soft pools of light. The further we walked, the quieter the house became. The muffled bass of music still pulsed faintly from the living room, but here in this side space, a small alcove near the back, half lit by a single lamp, everything felt different. The air was softer, shadows drawn out longer, the rest of the party reduced to a distant hum. I found myself standing between them. One on my left, close enough that her perfume floated around me again, warm, sweet, steadying. The other on my right, her arm brushing mine occasionally, as though testing how much space I'd allow her to claim. They didn't crowd me, they didn't need to. Their presence alone was enough to close me in, though it wasn't a trap, more like a circle, a chosen space they'd decided I belonged in. I tried to say something, anything that might make sense of why they'd singled me out, but the words snagged in my throat. My mind felt caught between the nearness of their bodies, the weight of their attention, and the strange calm that threaded through my nerves. The one on my right leaned just slightly, her shoulder grazing mine. Her voice came first, quiet enough that only I could hear. "We've been watching you tonight." Her words froze me in place. My pulse hammered, every instinct telling me to laugh it off, to assume she meant it casually, but her eyes said otherwise. There was no teasing in them. Only intent. The other woman tilted her head, studying me like I was some kind of puzzle she already knew the answer to. And then, without hesitation, she leaned in close, her lips curved in a smile that felt both playful and certain. "We've picked you." 3 words. Simple, soft, but they landed like a spark in dry grass. For a moment I forgot the air in my lungs. I stared, caught between disbelief and something deeper I couldn't yet name. Picked me? Out of everyone here, people louder, more charming, more confident, they had chosen me? I searched their faces for a sign of a joke, but there was none. Their smiles weren't mocking, their eyes weren't cruel. Instead, they looked at me with a kind of quiet conviction, as if they'd already agreed between themselves long before this moment. The silence stretched, thick with possibility. My hands felt restless, my chest tight, but beneath the nervous rush there was also a stirring heat, a pull I couldn't deny. Cornered, yes. But for the first time all night, I didn't want to escape. For a few seconds I could only stand there, caught in the echo of those words. "We've picked you." They lingered in the air like smoke, curling around me, impossible to escape. My chest tightened, not from fear but from the weight of being seen in a way I wasn't used to. I opened my mouth to speak, but the one on my left raised a hand gently, her fingers brushing my wrist as if to say, "Wait." The touch was light, but it steadied me, anchored me. "It's not what you think," she said softly, her eyes searching mine. "This isn't a game for us." The woman on my right leaned closer, her voice pitched even lower, meant only for me. We noticed you tonight. The way you stayed back, the way you listened more than you spoke." Her hand found my shoulder, resting there with a warmth that spread through the thin fabric of my shirt. "Do you know how rare that is? To find someone who isn't trying to be the loudest voice in the room?" I swallowed hard, caught between the intensity of their closeness and the sincerity in their words. The music from the other room drifted faintly through the walls, upbeat, careless. But here, in this dim corner, it felt like we existed in a different world entirely. "We wanted you to know," the first woman continued, her gaze unwavering, "that we see you. Not the quietness, not the hesitation, but the way you notice. The way your eyes linger on people like you're trying to understand them. That's what drew us." Her confession cut through me, leaving me unsteady. No one had ever said something like that to me, not so plainly, not with such conviction. My instinct was to deflect, to joke, to make it lighter. But her hand slid against mine at that exact moment, her palm warm, her fingers curling softly over the back of my hand, and the thought of retreat dissolved. The woman at my shoulder gave a small smile, though there was something vulnerable tucked beneath it. "We're not here for distractions. At this stage in our lives, we don't waste our time on things that don't matter. We want real connection. And when we saw you tonight, we both felt it, the same pull." Her words settled into the space between us, heavy but not suffocating. I could feel my heartbeat drumming in my ears, faster than I wanted it to, but underneath it was something steadier, the quiet recognition that they weren't teasing me. They weren't toying with me. This was real. Their touches weren't demanding. One hand still rested on mine, grounding me, while the other remained at my shoulder, steady and patient. No pressure, no rush, just presence. I let out a slow breath I hadn't realized I was holding, my voice barely more than a whisper. "Why me?" The question hung there, fragile. And in their silence, in the way their eyes softened at once, I felt the answer forming before they even spoke. The question I'd asked, "Why me?" still hovered in the space between us, unanswered in words but alive in their eyes. One of them smiled faintly, her lips parting as if she might respond, yet instead she simply stepped closer. The room seemed to shrink around me, though I knew it was just them, drawing the circle tighter. Her hand, the one already resting at my shoulder, shifted slightly. Just enough that her fingers grazed the side of my neck, tracing the edge where skin met collar. The contact was feather-light, but it sent a shiver straight down my spine. My breath caught, and she noticed. I could see it in the way her smile deepened, soft but knowing. The other woman still held my hand, her thumb now moving in slow, absent circles across the back of it. The gesture wasn't bold, yet it was impossibly intimate. It wasn't a test, it was reassurance, a wordless way of telling me I didn't need to retreat. That she wanted me exactly where I was. Time felt suspended. I could hear the faintest shift of laughter from the other room, the clink of a glass being set down, but it all sounded far away, like background noise in another life. Here, in this corner, only the three of us existed. I searched their faces for answers. Both of them watched me closely, not predatory, not impatient, but with the kind of attention that made me feel like I was the only thing that mattered to them in this moment. My pulse hammered. My chest felt both too tight and too open at once. The woman at my neck leaned in slightly, her breath brushing against my ear. "You don't have to say anything," she whispered, and the warmth of her voice against my skin made my knees weaken. "Just feel it." The words nearly unraveled me. I swallowed hard, unsure if I could even trust my voice if I tried to answer. My thoughts tangled, torn between the impulse to pull back and the stronger impulse to lean in closer. And then, as if sensing the turmoil in me, the other woman reached up and tucked a stray strand of my hair gently behind my ear. The motion was so tender, so precise, that for a moment it didn't even feel like a flirtation, it felt like care. Yet her fingers lingered just long enough against my temple to ignite something more. I drew a slow breath, but it came out unsteady, and when I exhaled, I realized both of them were smiling again. Not in triumph, not in amusement, but in quiet recognition. As if they both knew exactly what I was feeling, because they felt it too. The silence thickened, the air between us heavy with what hadn't been said. I didn't need their words anymore to understand. In their touch, their nearness, their unwavering eyes, everything was already clear. This wasn't a passing interest. This was something deeper, something chosen. And though my body hummed with nerves, I knew I didn't want to run. For a long moment, none of us moved. It felt as though the world outside had paused, waiting to see what I would do. The tension in the air pressed close, heavy but not suffocating. And then, almost as if they'd read my hesitation, one of them eased her hand from my neck and gave a small, reassuring smile. "Come sit with us," she said softly, tilting her head toward the quiet alcove just a few steps away. The other woman's hand slipped from mine, only to brush against my palm one last time before she too turned toward the small corner. They didn't pull me along or demand I follow. They simply walked there together, their shoulders almost touching, and left the choice to me. And yet it didn't feel like a choice at all. I followed. The alcove was nothing more than a tucked-away space with a small bench beneath a window, the glass reflecting the glow of string lights outside. When the three of us settled there, the world seemed to grow even smaller, quieter. The music and chatter from the party blurred into a faint hum, barely noticeable anymore. One of them sat close enough that our knees brushed, a steady point of contact that anchored me. The other angled herself slightly toward me, her body open, her expression unguarded. Their nearness was no longer overwhelming, it was strangely calming, as though they'd both decided the moment wasn't about rushing forward but about allowing something real to take root. We began to talk. Not about the party or the people in the other room, but about ourselves. They spoke first. About work, about the kind of long days that left them craving quiet nights like this. About mistakes they'd made in love before, the lessons they'd carried forward, the strength it took to keep hoping for something genuine. Their words weren't rehearsed, weren't meant to impress. They were raw, honest, even a little vulnerable. And I found myself listening, truly listening, in the same way they'd noticed me doing earlier. Their voices were steady but softened by confession, and I realized how much trust it took for them to share these things with someone they had just chosen. When I spoke, it was hesitant at first, but they leaned in, giving me the kind of attention that made each word feel like it mattered. I told them about the times I'd felt invisible in rooms like this, about how being quiet had always made me feel overlooked. Their eyes softened, and in that moment I felt not just understood, but accepted. At some point, one of them reached for my hand again, this time more deliberately, her fingers lacing gently with mine. The other leaned her shoulder against me, her warmth seeping through the fabric of my shirt. Neither gesture felt rushed. They were grounding, steady, as if to say, "You belong here, with us, right now." And for the first time that evening, I believed it. The hours slipped away almost unnoticed. What had started as hushed confessions turned into easier conversation, laughter threading gently between stories. Every so often, one of them would brush my hand as she spoke, or the other would lean her head lightly against my shoulder when she grew tired of sitting upright. Each small touch carried no urgency, no demand, only a quiet reassurance that they were present, and they wanted me present too. The party beyond the alcove slowly began to fade. I could hear voices thinning out, doors opening and closing as people said their goodbyes, the swell of music dipping lower with each passing moment. Yet in this corner, time felt suspended. The three of us existed in a softer rhythm, apart from the rest. At some point, I realized I wasn't nervous anymore. The earlier rush in my chest, the dizzying heat of being chosen, had settled into something steadier, warmer. I wasn't bracing for the next move, wasn't waiting for the moment to collapse. I was simply there. With them. One of the women shifted closer on the bench, her knee pressing fully against mine now, deliberate and unflinching. She didn't move away when I didn't flinch. Instead, she gave me a smile that was small but real, the kind that reached her eyes. Her hand found mine again, this time resting there easily, as though it belonged. The other, still leaning into me, tilted her face up slightly. Her cheek brushed my shoulder, her hair grazing my jaw. "You feel different now," she murmured, almost to herself. I breathed out slowly, realizing she was right. Maybe I just stopped doubting it, I said quietly. She smiled at that, her head lowering again to rest against me more fully. The steady weight of her was grounding, her presence both gentle and undeniable. The three of us fell into a kind of silence then, but it wasn't empty. It was full of everything that had been said, and everything that didn't need to be. The hush of it wrapped around us, more intimate than words. When the rest of the house finally grew still, music silenced, lights dimmed, the women exchanged a look over me. There was no competition in it, no unspoken rivalry. It was something else entirely, a shared recognition, an agreement that this was right, exactly as it was. One gave my hand a soft squeeze, her thumbs stroking lightly across my skin. The other nestled closer into my side, her breathing slowing, steady and calm. Together, their warmth surrounded me, and in that moment, I felt chosen not just in word, but in truth. As the night drew toward its end, I understood something I hadn't before. Sometimes connection doesn't arrive with fireworks or grand declarations. Sometimes it begins quietly, in a dim alcove at the edge of a party, and grows into something unforgettable. And as their presence closed around me, steady and sure, I realized this wasn't the kind of night I would walk away from unchanged.